For almost a decade, Watchtower has been fighting over a former Bethel complex near St. Petersburg, reportedly worth more than $30 million. The property once served as the national headquarters supporting approximately 175,000 Jehovah's Witnesses. But today it is controlled by a medical institution connected to the Russian government. Watchtower lost the property in Russian courts, received a favorable judgment from the European Court of Human Rights that Russia refused to follow, and then carried the dispute into a federal courtroom in the United States. But the American lawsuit was dismissed before the judge examined the central accusations, because Watchtower had failed to notify the Russian defendants through the legally required method. Then, in July 2026, Judge Rudolph Contreras reopened the case and gave the organization 180 additional days to correct its mistake. Some may describe that as a victory, but Watchtower still has no property, no compensation, and no judgment declaring Russia financially responsible. Today, we will examine what happened, why a Russian court called Watchtower's ownership arrangement fictitious, and whether this latest American decision is really as significant as it may appear. Before we begin, if you appreciate evidence-based investigations into Watchtower's history, finances, and legal decisions, please like this video and subscribe to Kingdom Wisdom. Your support helps us continue examining stories that ordinary publishers are rarely told in detail. To understand this case, we must begin with the property Watchtower lost. Part 1. The $30 million Bethel, Watchtower lost. In the early 1990s, after decades of Soviet restrictions, Jehovah's Witnesses were again permitted to operate openly in Russia. The administrative center of Jehovah's Witnesses purchased and renovated a complex near St. Petersburg that became the organization's national headquarters. According to documents filed in the American case, approximately 300 full-time ministers lived and worked there, while the facility supported around 175,000 witnesses throughout Russia. The Russian Administrative Center originally owned the property. In 2000, however, it transferred 10 buildings to Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, an American nonprofit corporation. A second agreement transferred additional buildings and land in 2010. The transactions were registered with Russian authorities, and Watchtower says it later paid approximately 172 million rubles in Russian property and land taxes. On paper, the owner of Bethel was now an American corporation. In practice, the Russian Administrative Center continued occupying the complex without paying rent. It operated and maintained the property much as it had before, while the Pennsylvania Corporation held the legal title. That arrangement became crucial in 2017, when the Russian Supreme Court declared the Administrative Center an extremist organization, dissolved it, and authorized the confiscation of its property. Hundreds of local Jehovah's Witness organizations were also liquidated, and peaceful believers were subsequently prosecuted for religious activity. Russia's persecution of individual witnesses deserves condemnation, but that does not prevent us from examining Watchtower's corporate decisions. When Russian authorities targeted Bethel, Watchtower argued that it belonged to an American corporation, not the dissolved Russian organization. Russia responded that the transfers existed mainly on paper because the administrative center continued possessing and operating the property without paying rent. In December 2017, a Russian district court accepted that argument and declared the gift agreements fictitious. According to the court, the Russian organization had effectively continued exercising the authority of an owner. Watchtower appealed, but lost. In February 2019, the complex was permanently transferred to the VA Almazov National Medical Research Center, connected to Russia's Ministry of Health. Watchtower had lost a property reportedly worth more than $30 million. The dispute also exposed an organizational reality that ordinary publishers probably knew little about. One corporation held the title, while another entity occupied and operated the facility. Those arrangements were decided by Watchtower's legal leadership, not by the publishers whose donations supported the organization. When the arrangement was challenged, however, the entire religious community suffered the consequences. Part 2. A legal victory that produced nothing. Jehovah's Witness organizations and individual members later brought multiple cases against Russia before the European Court of Human Rights. These involved banned publications, criminal prosecutions, dissolved congregations, the blocking of the official Jehovah's Witness website, and the confiscation of numerous properties. In June 2022, the European Court issued a major judgment in Taganrog LRO and others versus Russia. It found violations involving religious freedom, expression, association, personal liberty, and property rights. The court concluded that Russia's definition of extremism had been applied against peaceful believers and instructed Russia to discontinue prosecutions, release imprisoned witnesses, and return confiscated properties or pay compensation. Legally, this was an important victory. Practically, it produced almost nothing. Russia was no longer cooperating with the European human rights system and refused to follow the decision. Bethel was not returned, compensation was not paid, and the campaign against Jehovah's Witnesses continued. Watchtower possessed a favorable legal judgment, but Russia still possessed the buildings. In September 2024, Watchtower opened another front by suing the Russian Federation, Russia's Ministry of Health, and the Almazov Center in Washington, D.C. The organization alleged that Russia had unlawfully confiscated property belonging to an American corporation. It requested compensatory damages from the defendants and punitive damages against Almazov. The American lawsuit is not simply asking a judge to return the buildings. Its principal objective is financial compensation. But foreign governments generally receive sovereign immunity from lawsuits in American courts. Watchtower must prove that its claims qualify for an exception under the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act. Its legal theory attempts to connect the confiscated property to Russian commercial activity involving assets in the United States, but the judge has not accepted that theory. Before it could even be examined, Watchtower made a procedural mistake that nearly ended the case. Part 3. The mistake that nearly ended the case. A foreign government must be officially notified of a lawsuit through precise methods established by American law and international agreements. Watchtower attempted to serve the Russian defendants by international courier. The defendants learned about the lawsuit and hired attorneys, but actual knowledge does not replace legally valid service. Russia had formally objected to service by mail under the Hague Service Convention. American courts therefore consider this method legally insufficient for Russian defendants. Russia, its Ministry of Health and Almazov, asked Judge Rudolf Contreras to dismiss the lawsuit, and on September 22, 2025, he agreed. Because Watchtower had not properly served the defendants, the court lacked personal jurisdiction over them. The case was dismissed without prejudice. This did not prove that Russia legally owned Bethel, but it was a serious failure by Watchtower. The organization had begun a multi-million-dollar international lawsuit against a foreign government. Yet the case was dismissed before the central allegations were examined because a fundamental procedural requirement had not been completed correctly. Watchtower asked the judge to reconsider. It argued that Almazov knew about the case and that this should be sufficient. Alternatively, it requested 180 more days to notify the defendants through diplomatic channels. On July 23, 2026, Judge Contreras rejected the first argument. Almazov's knowledge of the lawsuit did not make the original notification valid. On that question, Watchtower lost again. However, the judge gave the organization another opportunity. He vacated the dismissal and allowed 180 days for Watchtower to serve the defendants through diplomatic channels. This limited decision may be presented as a victory, but the judge did not rule that Watchtower owned the property, that Russia violated international law, or that sovereign immunity does not apply. He did not order Russia to return Bethel or pay compensation. He merely allowed Watchtower to correct its procedural mistake. Even if service is completed, Russia can still challenge the court's authority, invoke sovereign immunity, and argue that Watchtower's claims do not satisfy the requirements of American law. Watchtower has not won the battle. It has only received permission to return to the starting line. After almost a decade, Watchtower does not possess the Bethel complex, has received no compensation, and has no American judgment declaring Russia liable. Its European victory produced no practical recovery, while its American lawsuit was initially dismissed because the organization failed to notify the defendants correctly. The July 2026 decision gave Watchtower another opportunity, but it did not confirm any of its accusations. The organization must now complete diplomatic service and then overcome Russian sovereign immunity. It must also defend an ownership arrangement that a Russian court previously described as fictitious. Even if Watchtower eventually wins a financial judgment, it would still need to enforce that judgment against a government that already ignored the European Court of Human Rights. The case also raises questions about transparency. Publishers donate believing they are supporting Kingdom Halls, branch offices, and Bethel facilities, but legal ownership may belong to distant corporations governed by agreements most members will never see. When everything functions normally, those distinctions remain invisible. When a property worth more than $30 million is confiscated, the identity of the legal owner suddenly becomes the center of the dispute. Russia's persecution of peaceful Jehovah's Witnesses should be condemned, But that does not require us to ignore Watchtower's corporate choices or the procedural failure that nearly destroyed its American case. The record tells a far less triumphant story than Watchtower wins in court. The organization remains without the property and without the money. Its latest achievement is simply another opportunity to continue a lawsuit it may still lose before the ownership dispute is ever examined. What do you think? Is Watchtower responsibly defending property that Russia unlawfully confiscated, or does this case expose the risks of transferring valuable religious property between corporations while another entity continues operating it? And if Watchtower eventually receives millions of dollars, should it explain publicly how that money will be used, and whether any of it will directly help the witnesses affected by Russia's ban? Share your opinion in the comments. If you found this investigation valuable, please like the video and subscribe to Kingdom Wisdom. We will continue following the public court records during the 180-day period. Thank you for watching.